When our next guest founded Priceline in 1997, the value proposition was pretty simple. What if leisure travelers could use the internet to find last-minute deals on hotels and flights, clearing last-minute inventory? Today, Priceline has a market cap of more than $80 billion, and in the ensuing years, he has been prolifically inventing, among other things, and holds over 700 US and international patents. His latest venture, launched earlier this year, is Upside, which targets the category of unmanaged business travelers, a market he estimates could be north of $165 billion in the US alone. To share what he's been up to, please welcome Priceline founder and CEO and co-founder of Upside Travel, Jay Walker, and Fortune's Alan Murray.
So what Clay didn't tell you about Jay Walker is, aside from his 700 patents and his multiple startups, he also is a collector of artifacts of the human imagination. And at his home in Connecticut has a beautiful library that has all the pieces he's collected. And we're fortunate that he's brought some of those with us today, with him today, to show us and give us a sense of how imagination and innovation has developed over time. And Jay, tell us what you've got here.
So, Alan, imagination is sort of the great untapped resource. We talk about innovation, but there is no innovation without imagination. And that's the moment where we have an original thought. And to start with, I'm going to take imagination out of my pocket right here. This is a cuneiform cone. This is the invention of writing. So what happens here, and we're ready to look at it now, I think. Let's see if we can get this here.
I didn't realize you're a stage technician as well.
I'm just going to hold this up here. So what happens here is somebody comes up with the idea that instead of writing once, we can embed it in clay. Instead of telling a story, we can embed the story in a piece of clay, put it in a kiln, and writing is invented as an act of imagination. We, of course, take it for granted. It takes 400 years before this page from the Gutenberg Bible shows another leap of imagination, Alan. And this time, the idea of movable type. Instead of writing one at a time, somebody imagines moving pieces of type and press it on a paper. And here you can see a page from the original Gutenberg Bible, which is 1455. And most of you might think, if you come from the West, that printing was invented by Gutenberg, and of course you would be wrong. Printing is invented in China 300 years earlier. The Chinese print 10 million books before Gutenberg prints the first one. But one of the things the Chinese invent with printing is the first paper money. They print money. This is another act of imagination. The idea that a piece of paper can stand for money in the bank, in this case cash coin, rolls of coins here with a counterfeiting warning right on the bill. If we catch you counterfeiting, we will not only kill you, but we will take the assets of your entire extended family and we will give those assets to the person that reported you. Pretty effective anti-counterfeiting tool. Okay? So the Chinese invent money, and of course they invent printing. So let's take a look at what they print. Here's an example of the oldest surviving medical text that has been printed in the world.
What's the date?
1116 AD. This is 900 years old, and guess what's being printed here? Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine, as we all know, is thousands of years old. When the Chinese invent printing, what do they print? They print books of pharmaceutical and medical information. There are animals and ducks and all kinds of turtles, and here's a crab here. This 900-year-old book is a testimony to the ancient Chinese medicine. They have imagined that if they take all of their medical knowledge and they print it, it might survive. But this is the only copy that survives. Why? The Chinese never imagined the binding. They never imagined that the book should have a binding. They were always made of paper, which means they disintegrated. So,
what else have you got?
Let's take a look at something a little more modern since we're looking at printing. This is the list of Chinese medicines to export to the world. In 1889, China is looking for something it can export. It's, of course, exporting tea in massive quantities. Somebody says, what about Chinese medicine? And here is a page from Canton's medical export list. Here at the top, it says the port of Canton, the old name for Guangzhou, of course. And here is an endless list of all the twigs and leaves. Here's the seeds and fruits. The Chinese have organized every possible export of medicine, and they've imagined creating a catalog encyclopedia of every medicine. So here you can see simple acts of imagination stepping forward. Even though printing is invented, that doesn't mean you're going to invent currency. It doesn't mean you're going to invent commercial documents and ledgers. So now let's take a look at something made in China that's extraordinary for imagination. Many of you may not know what these are. They're Jacquard loom cards. In France, in around 1800, a man named Jacquard invents the idea of punching holes in cards as a way to control a loom. He imagines, instead of having children crawl through the loom, he imagines he'll have holes. And the holes will then allow hooks to drop through, and each card acts like a programming device.
It's the first computer.
It's the first computer control system, right. It's 1800, and he invents a computer control system, and yet nobody wants to buy a Jacquard loom. And in because it's such a contraption and child labor is so cheap, nobody needs it, until this. They come up with an idea to show off what can be woven. To prove they can weave anything, they weave a book in silk. They take Chinese fine silk and they weave an entire prayer book in silk. There is no printing in this book, Alan. Every page is woven in 1886. The book is woven in silk. It's a piece of sales collateral, and here's how it works. In the front of the book, it was given to the wives of the mill owners, of the industrial mill owners. They leave a space to weave your family crest in. They would come and give it to the wife and say, Madame, this is a gift from the Jacquard Loom Company. We have woven a prayer book in Chinese silk. Your husband owns a mill. All he needs to do is weave your family crest inside the beautiful prayer book. But without a Jacquard loom, ladies and gentlemen, you can't do it. So you have to buy a Jacquard loom, or your wife is going to give you a very hard time. Back in 1886. And they sold Jacquard looms to complete this book. So you can see it's an act of imagination to imagine cards with holes can control machines. Those machines can weave a book in silk that becomes a sales tool.
But so you've studied this vast history of imagination and innovation. What's the pinnacle of that history in your view?
Here it is. The greatest moment in the history of human imagination occurs with the most unbelievable idea. The idea really starts with this book. And in this book, as everybody knows, the Earth is in the center of the universe. All right? Of course, in China at that time, the Middle Kingdom was the center of the Earth, but the Earth was the center of the universe. And everybody could tell. The Earth is stable, the stars move, the planets move in the sky. It's obvious, except it's wrong. Copernicus, with measurement, says, you know, it's not true. The sun is at the center of the solar system. Now, Alan, for that to be true, the Earth has to be spinning at about 1,000 miles an hour. Do you feel the Earth spinning? Not
sometimes.
The sun comes up in the morning and it goes down at night. The sun is clearly moving. The Earth is not spinning. And for somebody to say that the sun is at the center of the solar system, you'd have to have elliptical orbits in order to explain the seasons. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the first celestial map with the sun at the center of the solar system. It is the dividing line between the age of faith and the age of reason in the West. It is the proof in the scientific method to explain why the planets are where they are, why the stars where they are. No matter how counterintuitive it was.
What year was this published?
1660.
1660, and this is it.
This is it. This is the moment where mankind says, if we can prove the hypothesis, if we can test it and check again, then it must be true. The Earth must be spinning. this change becomes the leading edge of science.
You got one more box back here.
I have one little thing, because in this map in 1660, they knew very well that this was the orbit of Mars. And so what I brought with me for the act of imagination to finish it is a piece of the planet Mars. This is one of about 100 rocks in the world that are from Mars. And this is the journey that defies imagination. For this rock to get here, here's the story. An asteroid hit Mars about 60 million years ago with enough mass to eject material at Mars at about the escape velocity of Mars, about 10,000 miles an hour. That material is spread equally in space randomly. This one tiny piece of that material has to perfectly intersect the Earth's orbit between 30 and 50 million miles away. The odds of that are like one piece of sand on a mile of beach. It then has to come through the atmosphere and not burn up. 99% of everything coming through atmosphere burns up. Then it has to land in only two places in the world, the Sahara Desert or Antarctica. Why, Alan? Every rock on the ground is from space in the Sahara Desert or Antarctica. Then it has to happen when somebody is walking by in the Sahara Desert after the rock travels from Mars. They have to pick it up because they know it's that, and then they can perfectly type it. They send it back to a laboratory, and based on the gravitational signature in the crystals, we can tell this was made in Mars's exact gravity, so we know it's from Mars. So this rock has made the journey from the surface of Mars to China.
Amazing. And it ended in China.
Well, no, actually, this is in Sahara, but it's in China now.
Today.
It's in China today.
Okay. So let me ask you something, Jay, because you've made this clearly detailed study of the history of imagination, and imagination leads to innovation, and innovation has been at the core of our conversations for the last couple of days. And one of the topics we've been talking about is innovation in China. So what are the characteristics of a society that make it a fertile place for imagination and innovation?
Well, innovation is about rejecting the old. It's about saying, I have a new idea, right? If your idea is, I know everything, right, then you're not going to innovate. If your idea is the world has nothing to teach me, you're not going to innovate. If your idea is I don't need your scientific method, I have all the answers I need. If you're the Catholic Church for 1,000 years, it's a venial sin to have imagination.
It's great for art, not good for innovation.
Not good for innovation. So the challenge in innovation is and especially in China, it's the tension between the Confucian tradition of respect for elders, respect for the professor, respect for the established way, and yet the ability to challenge that way and say, no, I have a new way, I have a new answer. And not only that, early on, China rejected the scientific method. Of course, that's come 180 degrees around, and now China has strongly embraced the scientific method. But until it did, it was at a massive disadvantage. The Confucian culture, combined with the lack of a scientific method, meant there was no reason to challenge anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is the big change in the modern China. They've reversed it.
So you're now seeing, in spite of the Confucian values, innovation happening here.
Yes, China has enormous challenges with innovation. They have a deep respect for grades in schools. In the West, you know, we often have a phrase, those that can't do, teach. In China, that would be an insult. Those that teach are the best. But not in America. Bill Gates is a college dropout, and Americans tend to be proud of it. Chinese are mortified by it. You know, China has other challenges that make innovation difficult. Jack Ma talked about, don't please your boss, please your customer.
Yeah.
Americans have always pleased the customer. They understand the customer is in charge. That's a relatively new idea in China. So those are drivers. China is fast to adapt, fast to learn, and especially in the modern environment, extremely aggressive in using science and technology. So those are the tensions between a Confucian tradition and the modern.
Well, Jay, this has been a fascinating tour through human imagination. Thank you for bringing these artifacts with you and sharing them with us.
It's my pleasure.
Please.
Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.